is Radio Prague International, coming to you from the Czech capital.
Hello and welcome. I'm Anna-Marie Regner and you're listening to Czechia in 30 minutes. Coming up in today's program, government backs school phone ban. Critics say it's unnecessary. Ex-director, crisis at Vaclav Havel Library was visible long before today's turmoil. Why study Czech today? Neil Bermel on language, translation, and the future of Czech studies. But first, here's the news brought to you by Daniela Lazarova.
News.
Trade unions at Prague Airport have declared a strike alert over the appointment of Radomír Lašák as chairman of the board. In a statement, the union said they were concerned about the airport's future direction and development, as well as job security and the protection of employees' legitimate interests. The unions also cited recent comments by Prime Minister Andrej Babík as a reason for the strike alert. During a parliamentary question and answer session earlier this month, Babík said the state could consider listing part of Prague Airport's shares on the stock exchange. In response, the Finance Ministry said its goal was to further develop Prague Airport, not weaken the state-owned company. The strike alert has not affected the airport's operations. The government's decision to ask the Constitutional Court to reject or dismiss President Petr Pavel's competence complaint has drawn sharp criticism from the opposition. Justice Minister Jeroným Tejc said on Monday the cabinet would also seek the recusal of Judge-Rapporteur Pavel Šámal, arguing that his preliminary ruling amounted to unprecedented judicial activism and interfered with the government's constitutional powers. MEP Danuše Nerudová accused the government of undermining the country's highest court, comparing its actions to the practices of the communist-era secret police. Former Justice Minister Jiří Pospíšil called the bid to remove Šámal from the case scandalous. A Constitutional Court spokesperson confirmed on Tuesday that the court had received the government's response. The full bench is due to rule in September on the government's objection, alleging bias against Šámal. Interior Minister Lubomír Metnar and Transport Minister Ivan Bednárik on Tuesday presented draft legislation expanding the use of anti-drone measures to protect critical infrastructure. The proposal responds to a growing number of incidents involving unauthorized drones near protected sites and would strengthen the authorities' powers to counter them. Under the proposed amendment, employees of companies operating critical infrastructure should be allowed to disable or destroy drones they identify as dangerous. Companies would also be able to decide whether they want no drone zones established over their facilities. At present, only police officers and members of the armed forces are authorized to neutralize unmanned aircraft. The bill aims to establish a clear legal framework for a swift and proportionate response to security incidents involving uncooperative drones. A large wild cat believed to be a black puma was spotted near the village of Kvasiovice in South Bohemia on Monday, the second such sighting in the region within a week. Police have alerted local authorities, veterinarians and gamekeepers, but say there are no reports of the animal escaping from a zoo or private owner. The authorities urge anyone who spots the animal to call the emergency number 158 and not to approach or attempt to capture it. Finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. Wednesday should be partly cloudy with scattered showers in the northwest and day temperatures between 19 and 24 degrees Celsius. I'm Daniela Lazarova and that's the end of the news.
The Czech government has approved a proposal to ban the use of mobile phones in schools. Starting in 2027, the ban would apply to children in nursery, primary schools, grammar schools, and conservatories. The opposition and the children's ombudsman oppose the proposal, arguing that it is unnecessary. Romana Grajcarova has the story.
In the classroom, during breaks, in after-school clubs and even in the school cafeteria. Under the proposal, children would no longer be allowed to use mobile phones or other electronic devices in any of these places. According to Education Minister Robert Plaga, the cabinet unanimously backed the measure.
Scientific studies show it, and you can also see it for yourself in schools that have already introduced such rules. They work. Children talk to each other again. Schools are once more filled with children's voices instead of pupils scrolling through their phones during breaks and then being unable to concentrate in class.
Children would still be allowed to use mobile phones in exceptional cases, for example, to monitor diabetes or as an aid related to a disability.
We haven't forgotten that there are children who need a mobile phone because of a health condition and have an application on it that they rely on. The law allows for such use. Likewise, it does not prevent phones from being used during lessons for educational purposes.
The opposition, however, disagrees with the proposal. According to the leader of the Civic Democrats, or ODS, Martin Kupka, there is no need for a blanket ban.
Zákaz, který má sejmout odpovědnost kde z koho.
This is a ban that shifts responsibility away from everyone else and ultimately turns teachers into inspectors, checking the contents of children's backpacks. At the same time, Czech schools already have guidelines that allow them to decide for themselves how to regulate mobile phone use.
V tomto směru přistupovat k používání mobilů ve školách.
Schools currently set their own rules on phone use through their internal regulations. According to the government, around 93% of primary schools and multi-year grammar schools have already introduced such rules. This is also the argument used by Children's Ombudsman Martin Beneš, who opposed the proposal during the consultation process.
Z mého pohledu je daleko funkčnější právě to individuální řešení.
In my view, individual solutions at the level of each school work much better because schools can discuss them with parents, children, and students. They can tailor the rules to the needs of pupils at that particular school. I think that works far better than a centrally imposed solution.
Mně tohleto funguje výrazně lépe než centrální řešení.
On the other hand, Karel Strachota, director of the educational program One World at Schools, supports nationwide regulation. According to him, individual school rules are not enough.
Ten obrovský problém vyrušování, protože prostě chci se podívat, co je nového.
At the events we organize, almost every teacher mentions the huge problem of classroom disruption. They also often say that parents would support if the state clearly said, yes, this is the right approach. The
government says the proposal is based on recommendations from the National Institute of Mental Health, which warns about the risks of addiction, anxiety, depression, and poorer academic performance. According to Jana Zapletalová, chair of the Association of School Psychologists, the biggest problem is messaging apps that children use to communicate during lessons.
Jedním z takových nejznámějších chatů je třeba Snap.
One of the best-known examples is Snapchat. It's a popular social network where all contents disappear after a while. The problem is that children constantly check it, and we now have clear evidence that this significantly disrupts their attention and concentration at school.
A jejich koncentraci ve školním prostředí.
The proposal will now go before the Chamber of Deputies. If it is approved by Parliament and signed by the President, the Czech Republic will join more than half of European countries that have already introduced similar nationwide rules, including France, Austria, and Greece.
Romana Grajcarová reporting. The future of the Vaclav Havel Library has become uncertain amid disputes over its leadership, governments, and the use of Vaclav Havel's name. Former director Milan Babík, who led the institution for less than a year, says many of today's problems were already apparent during his tenure. In an interview with Vít Pohanka, he reflects on his brief experience and on what he believes the library should represent.
I was approached by the board looking for a new director after my predecessor in that role, Michal Žantovský, left after a very long and distinguished service in that role, 8 years, I believe he was there. So it lasted about 6-7 months, perhaps. The courtship, if you will, a lot of interviews, including in person here in Prague. And I have to say, to be fair, that I spent quite a bit of time sort of spreading the legacy of Václav Havel in the United States before that through large-scale events, conferences, multi-day theater, museum exhibits, and so on. And Michal Žantovský had the pleasure of attending one of these at Colby College in 2022. Tim Snyder was there, Martin Putna, and some of the others, Jacques Rupnik. So I suppose this is what attracted the board and people around the library to me and my name. I'll also say that there were many people around here who were discouraging me from that job, noting some possibly toxic tendencies within the institution. But ultimately I did decide to essentially terminate my scholarly career in the United States and relocate for that job to the Czech Republic, including my children and everything that entails, looking for schools and so on. So that's how that came about. And in June 2024, I was inaugurated as the new director.
I will ask very bluntly, why didn't it last longer?
And I'll answer very bluntly as well. I literally do not know to this day. Well, in retrospect, I have a hunch. I could detect some deep problems within that institution right away. I think I can admit it now. I started looking for a different job only 3 months into my tenure at Vaclav Havel Library. And I think the problems that are miring the institution now were quite apparent to me already back then.
And perhaps we should explain to the listeners that main sponsor basically left, the director of 1 year, I think, was that Tomáš Sedláček. He left as well. I mean, I don't know actually what's happening now. What's the institution, what's the latest?
I can't say that I've been following the news that closely, but my understanding is that there is an effort by one member of the old board, which resigned, to put together essentially a new Václav Havel Library, perhaps even with Tomáš Sedláček still in some kind of a role, either as some kind of an ambassador, perhaps not a director. And I think that now the big question in the air is whether they'll be able to continue using the rights to Václav Havel's literary works and so on, which are obviously in the hands of the widow, Dagmar Havlová.
You know, Václav Havel is such a big name in our history. And I just wonder, as a completely lay person who knows absolutely nothing about the institution, what the heck is going on? I mean, why is it that a group of people who obviously, all of them, have got deep respect to the, let's say, the heritage or the historic kind of legacy of Václav Havel, why can't they work as a team?
See, I'd have to respectfully disagree with that assumption, actually, based on my experience with the board members.
You mean my assumption about the respect?
About the respect for the heritage or
legacy,
or the notion that the legacy was the overarching goal and the goal around which they were united. That, unfortunately, was not what I found when I worked there. I realized that I myself was quite naive coming into that job, thinking that that's what we were all supposed to be doing. So for me, it was a deeply sobering, sad, and professionally humiliating experience. So insofar as there is any future for the institution, I do not believe that that future will come together successfully if any of the old board members are involved with the new Václav Havel Library, if there is one to be formed.
That's kind of heavy stuff. That's heavier than I expected talking about that. But, you know, perhaps we've got some listeners in the United States. Just to explain, I mean, this is a very new tradition, unlike in the United States, where we've got the presidential libraries.
That's right.
Barack Obama now opened his center. That's
a wonderful building in Chicago. But that was actually the intention and Václav Havel's desire to basically have a library in the style of American presidential libraries.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Exactly. It would be a place that would serve as an archive, certainly, and a documentation center. But for him, I think the really important part, the really important characteristic was to have a place that would be alive, that would be a meeting place, a vibrant place, a hub of civil society where people could come together and discuss things, not just pertinent or relevant to his tenure as a president or dissident or playwright, not just dwell on this archival evidence and endlessly regurgitate what was the meaning of this or that passage in his works, but really relate his ideas to contemporary issues and the future. Obviously, all in pursuit of freedom and democracy.
I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I just wonder what it says about Czech society and the Czechs' kind of, relationship to figures such as Václav Havel. We've got still Institute Václava Klause, Václav Klaus Institute. Have you ever been there?
To the Klaus Institute? No. And perhaps I should pay them a visit. I'm not sure they'd let me in, but perhaps they would. It is sad. It is truly sad. And we're talking in the 90th year after Havel's birth. This is the 90th anniversary of his birth. Should have been a year of celebration. And I do understand that he is a polarizing figure, and I completely respect my fellow citizens' right to disagree with my view of Václav Havel. I do regard him as an important figure. I do think that some of his writings and ideas are truly timeless and applicable to all kinds of contexts. I completely respect those who disagree with me, and I'm happy to engage in discussion with them. But nonetheless, I'm very saddened by the fact that those who should gravitate towards him and celebrate him and really use him to buttress and support their position in defending our civil society today, because these are truly difficult times when it comes to democracy and freedom. I was truly saddened to see that they do not work together, and in fact that Václav Havel perhaps is not even the main motivating factor, that there are other interests behind the functioning of that institution, that it in some ways had nothing to do with Václav Havel at all.
Well, without trying to be kind of devil's advocate in a sense, I would say, well, we just don't have that tradition, it's never been here. The Brits don't have that tradition, but would they, there would be there are probably Queen Elizabeth II libraries, right. I suppose, but not in the sense like in America. I mean, it's I just wonder, I'm trying to think of any other country, and specifically in Europe, where you would have an institution like that.
I can't, and I don't think that Václav Havel needs a library to be celebrated and studied and discussed and sort of used by civil society to energize its efforts in defending democracy and freedom. Certainly not. But that said, I think that at least some of the elements, some of the programs run by the Vaclav Havel Library were quite vital, were very important.
Example?
The club program, right? The regular meetings, evening meetings around various speakers. That's something that certainly I find very beneficial. Just a place to meet, discuss, hash out different ideas, free and open to the public. I think that's exactly what should be happening. That's the kind of parallel structure to the government that lets you escape the media noise, the political speeches, and really engage with your fellow citizens in a safe place, right? To perhaps discuss your disagreements instead of sitting down in front of your computer at night and spewing off a couple of angry posts on Facebook or Instagram or whatever else. So anything that promotes that kind of civil discussion, and Vaclav Havel Library did that to me is very important.
Milan Babík, former director of Vaclav Havel Library, speaking to Vít Pohanka. You can find the full unabridged version of the interview on Czechcast, our podcast in English about all things Czech, this coming Saturday on all major podcast platforms. A reminder that you're listening to Czechia in 30 minutes, a half hour of news, current affairs, and interesting stories brought to you by Radio Prague International. We are now moving on to our last story.
Neil Bermel is Professor of Czech Language and Linguistics at the University of Sheffield, where he has been teaching for nearly 3 decades. He was among the scholars who gathered in Prague this week for the 7th World Congress of Bohemian Studies and, during the event, received the Josef Dobrovský Medal for outstanding contributions to Czech studies. I sat down with him to talk about what first drew him to the Czech language, who chooses to study Czech today, and the challenges and opportunities facing the field.
First of all,
You have spent nearly 3 decades teaching Czech language and linguistics at the University of Sheffield. What first drew you to the Czech language, and why have you decided to devote your career to it?
Well, I was trained actually as a Russianist as an undergraduate and went to postgraduate study really to continue work in Russian and in linguistics, which I found interesting. And in my first year there, I was more or less assigned to study Czech as a second Slavonic language. The Czech teacher at the time there was Hanna Geifmanová, and she was just incredibly inspirational. She really encouraged us to combine that study of Czech language with Czech culture, and she created an entire group of enthusiasts out of us. And so I went away sort of converted. I did continue on and write my PhD on a topic involving Russian linguistics, but it was always a bit of a secret ambition to see whether I could maybe somehow combine that with Czech. And when I finished and a post came up in Czech linguistics at Sheffield, I thought, well, I've got to try this, try it out. To my great surprise, I was offered the job, and I decided, okay, so let's give this a try. But I think what drew me to Czech was not only kind of feeling more comfortable in the culture and more comfortable in the place, but also the sense that, at least in the West, the study of these smaller Slavonic languages was more of an open field. It felt to me like there was so much to do and so much of interest, and there was a very rich vein of material to mine. Russian was already well done. And I really felt when I did things Czech like I was making more of a contribution.
Who chooses to study Czech today? Has the profile of students changed? What draws them to the field?
We do have the occasional heritage student. With Czech, I think that's always been a real minority. Many more of those heritage speakers go to study Russian or Polish. But with Czech, it tends to be some interest having taken a trip here as a teenager or earlier. Sometimes it's just a desire to try something a little bit different. I think most students at 18 come to university and they don't know Czech authors and they don't know a lot about Czech history. Something draws them to it, and then it's our job as the teaching staff to kind of deepen that interest and show them what else there is to stay interested in Czech. And that's what we try to do over the course of the degree.
So to convert them as you had been converted 30 or more than 30 years ago?
Fundamentally, yes, just following in my teacher's footsteps, I guess.
Much of your research has focused on how the Czech language is used and how it changes. What do you find most fascinating about Czech?
I think when you approach a language like Czech as a non-native speaker, I think especially a speaker of a language like English that can be quite analytic and isolating. Our words don't have a lot of different forms to them. There's just a couple in each case. And you encounter a language like Czech that has, 10, 12, 14, 20 different forms for every word. At first it feels a bit overwhelming, and if you are the sort of slightly nerdy person who can get interested in that sort of thing, and I guess I am, you do start to ask yourself why, and how does it work, and why does it work, and what extra do the Czechs get from having all of that, abundant material to work with. And I think that was the first impulse that drew me into the study of morphological variation, because it's something we don't have a huge amount of in English, and I wanted to understand why.
You have also translated several books into English. What were the biggest challenges in translating those texts?
I think every book that I did was very different. I've translated novelists like Pavel Kohut, whose style is quite complex, and translating those quite long, complicated, playful sentences into English and still having it come out reading like an English text was the biggest challenge for me there. With an author like Daniela Fischerova, I think there it was, in a way, the simplicity of the text and the fact of how stripped back it was in many ways that, again, poses you certain challenges as a translator. You have to recreate that in some ways for the reader. And doing a historical memoir like I did with Helga Weissova, that again presents the challenges of making sure that an English reader who doesn't have any of that cultural background can still understand it and approach it and have the same immediacy for it that it has for the reader in the Czech Republic.
At a time when the humanities face increasing pressure in many countries, what do you see as the biggest challenges or perhaps opportunities for Czech studies?
Well, I think in general, you're absolutely right that especially the study of languages is coming under a lot of pressure. And especially with the advent of AI, there is a feeling, I think, in the public and among students that maybe it isn't actually worth learning these things that we used to sell as a kind of a usable skill, like translating and interpreting. Now there is the possibility of having them done at least partially well or adequately by machine translation. And we need a new way of thinking about how to work with AI to make the study of languages seem meaningful again. I think Czech has some of the best resources for the study of language that are available really across any language. And I'm thinking here of many of the tools that are available through the Czech Language Institute and the Czech National Corpus. And there's also a lot of expertise in the field, just really absolutely world-class people working in it. So for us, I think there's a real opportunity there to do work on Czech that is meaningful in a world context.
How important is it to meet Czech studies scholars from all over the world at events such as this one?
I think it's really important. Of course, we can see each other on Zoom, we can exchange emails, but it's at events like this where you get talking to people and someone else joins the conversation and ideas start to bounce off each other. It really leads to a kind of a collaboration that can spark new ideas, new collaborations, and new projects.
And finally, you have just received the Josef Dobrovský Medal for your outstanding contribution to Czech studies. What does it mean to you personally, receiving this award?
Oh, it means a huge amount. It's a great honor. It's recognition, I guess, for a lifetime of work in the field. I feel slightly strange that I'm old enough to now be receiving things for a lifetime. More than that, I think I was just very touched and very honored by the reception of my colleagues, and I think that expression of that meant a lot to me.
That story from Ruth Franková brings us to the end of today's half-hour broadcast. For more, you'll find us at www.radio.cz. You can also follow Radio Prague on Instagram, Facebook, and X. This is Anna-Marie Regner saying thanks for listening and goodbye.